Hi, it's Dennis Daly. When I started my radio career back in '65, I was thrilled with the entire idea of just being on the air. I hadn't yet gone to Indiana University and knew little, if anything, about how radio worked. I only knew what records I played and commercials I punched up and words I spoke. Actually went through an old Gates control board, down to the phone company, and out to a transmitter on Southeast 11th Street Road. In all the time I was there, I don't think I ever once visited the transmitter. I only know I turned it off at midnight. Back then we signed off at midnight, using a series of switches at the station. But there was so much more to know and discover as I progressed in my career. I hope to share some of what I learned in this report. When radio first started, it was all experimental. A lot of people got on the air, there was no organization, and no real places on the dial assigned. Then the government stepped in and started assigning radio frequencies. That cleared up all the interference. Soon there was some sense of the way the frequencies should be assigned legally. Let's look at stations in Chicago as an example. The original allotments for high-powered stations in Chicago put WGN at 560 kilohertz, WMAQ 670, BBM 780, WLS 89, and WCFL at 1000. Now those original 5 Chicago biggies, if you'll notice, were all 110 kilocycles apart. Not 100 as you might think. Now if you think that is neat, look at the New York stations on 570, 660, 770, 880, and 1010. 3 out of the 5 are on an adjacent channel from Chicago. There are 2 exceptions, but they're on the other side of the frequency. The aim is to allow as many stations as possible to be on the air, but not tread on each other's areas. Currently, the FM radio spectrum is nearly full. The question is, could you crowd in another station? Several decades ago, the stations in my hometown area underwent a shakeup, and the fellow who retained ownership of the original station for which I worked approached me about helping him get an FM on the air. I lived in D.C. at the time and visited the Federal Communications Commission. I knew I would only find a basic 3,000-watt frequency with the coverage area around Washington, Indiana, about this size. So I got a list of every radio station within a 150-mile radius and started drawing circles. And I had to find out not just the cities, but where the transmitters were. You see, it's not uncommon for a station's tower to be a long way out of town. The only proviso is that there be a strong signal downtown so it could be licensed there. Stupidly, as I would realize later, I started on the lower end of the FM band with the first commercial frequency. The lower ones are for non-commercial and public stations. But the problem was that on every channel I checked, there was at least one station in Indiana, Kentucky, or Illinois that covered up any chances of slipping a station into Washington, Indiana. For weeks, I checked charts and transmitter locations and drew circle after circle. Finally, I got to the last hope, the top of the dial, 1079. If this didn't work, I'd have some really bad news for the folks back home. I found there were 3 stations that might prevent 1079 from fitting. All of these were high-powered regional stations. One was in Indianapolis, but its signal didn't reach down here. The second was in St. Louis, but its transmitter was far into Illinois. Whew, that turned out not to be a problem. The third was in Kentucky. Wow, look at that. A little area where none of the 3 stations reached. Would a 3,000-watt local channel fit there? The answer was no and yes. No, if the transmitter were in Washington, a signal from there would cross over into the signal from Kentucky. But move the transmitter west of town across the river into the next county and voila! It fits. Barely. So I got a call from the FCC saying my request to have 107.9 in Washington, Indiana had been accepted if the tower were far west of town. It's all a big jigsaw puzzle. Today it's Memories 107.9. And every time I drive past the tower, I think of all those nights I made circles on FCC applications in crayon. They laughed when they called me. I'm Dennis Daly.